Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar today. We are excited to have you here as part of our Pathlock Innovation Series. We have many more sessions coming up throughout the day, so if you would like to join those, I'll put a link in the chat for you to be able to register. Our presentation right now is how Allen and Overy secured the PeopleSoft system through SSO and data masking. Our presenter today is Varghese George. He's the HR Systems Application Manager at Allen and Overy, and he'll introduce himself in just a moment.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me. My name is Varghese George. I'm the Applications Manager in the HR Systems team here at Allen and Overy, and welcome to today's session. Before I jump into the presentation, let me give you a bit of background about myself and the firm I work for. So I've been working on PeopleSoft for almost 25 years now. I started off as a technical developer with a global investment bank, and then I moved on to working for different law firms. And over the past few years, I've been managing various HR applications. And as part of my role, the firm I work for is Allen and Overy, which is a global law firm. We have more than 45 offices in over 30 countries across the world. And we have been using PeopleSoft to manage our personal data of our employees and our partners across our different offices. We have close to around 7,000 employees and partners in the firm. So in today's session, I'll be focusing mainly on the single sign-on aspect of the Pathlock, which we have implemented in our PeopleSoft system. I've been working with Pathlock for quite a few years now, and we have various modules of Pathlock implemented in PeopleSoft. So I'll primarily focus on single sign-on, and we'll look at the reason why we decided to implement single sign-on last year, what was the criteria for selecting the SSO product, and we'll also go into a bit of detail on how we set up, implemented, and configured Pathlock's SSO product. A few other areas which we are using from Pathlock, I'll also touch upon those products as well. This includes the privileged access functionality, which gives our system users and our administrators the ability to switch the user profile to take on the profile of a self-service user or a batch user. There is also the enhanced data securing feature, which is the data masking, and also the ability to log all access requests into PeopleSoft as well. So I'll touch upon those modules as well after going through the single sign-on area. Like Stephanie mentioned, we will have the time for Q&A at the end of the session, but by all means, if you have any questions in the meantime, just pop it on the chat or let me know, and I'm happy to field questions as and when it's raised. Okay, let me give a bit of background on the PeopleSoft system in Allen and Overy. So we have been using PeopleSoft HCM as our core HR applications since it was implemented almost 20 years ago. Our instances, which comprise of dev, UAT, we have got training instances, dedicated payroll instances, and pre-production instance. These are all hosted in data centers in Allen and Overy. Saying that we are working on a project where we will be migrating our instances to Azure Cloud. This is expected to go live later this year. We use PeopleSoft as our system for managing data of all our employees and partners across our different offices. So this is 45 plus offices, and it's close to 7,000 employees and partner data that is held in the PeopleSoft system. We have HR admin teams in various offices, but primarily our functional and technical support is provided by the HR systems teams, which are based in London and Belfast. In terms of our PeopleSoft system and the updates on the PeopleSoft system, we actively use selective adoption for making sure the functionality which is released from Oracle is reviewed and incorporated into our system on a regular basis. We also upgrade our people tools every year or 18 months. So our system is pretty up to date in terms of the application functionality and the people tools side. Let me give you a bit of background to we going ahead with single sign-on last year. Even though we had been looking at single sign-on for a few years now, for some reason or the other, it was always pushed back. The trigger for going ahead with single sign-on actually was a security incident in our firm where a phishing email was sent out to a number of users. One of our users inadvertently clicked on a link on an email and then entered the user credentials on a page. So this led to a review of all our systems and primarily all the core systems in the firm, and PeopleSoft being a tier 1 system in the firm because it holds all the HR data and sensitive data. So it was one of the first systems which came up for review. The information security team in Allen and Overy, which managed the review, came up with a number of recommendations, and the main one was to enable single sign-on to avoid such an incident in future. They also came up with other suggestions, including ensuring the data is more secure and also the access to the system is audited. So that is the background to we going ahead with taking steps to implement single sign-on in the system. So with regards to single sign-on, we defined a few criteria to select the right SSO product for PeopleSoft. So these are some of the criteria which we set to finalize the product which we would implement in PeopleSoft. Allen Overy uses a lot of Microsoft technologies, and we use Active Directory for credential authentication. So we were keen to ensure that any product which we chose could be incorporated with Azure AD. And we also were keen that the vendor should have experience with implementing single sign-on on PeopleSoft. And to ensure that incidents like capturing the user ID and password that could be prevented in future, we had to make sure that any pages where that information was captured in PeopleSoft would be removed. In addition to that, we also were keen that our support and admin teams were able to continue to support the application in the same manner they were doing prior to implementing SSO, which is accessing the system using the profile of other users when an issue is raised to see what exactly the problem is. So we wanted the support and help desk teams to continue with their activities as usual. We wanted also to make sure that sensitive data within the application could be hidden or masked. And there was also a need to ensure that the access to the system could be logged, and this would be in addition to any PeopleSoft provided auditing capabilities. So this was the criteria which we defined for selecting the SSO product. And after reviewing PathLock solution in the SSO space, all these criteria was met by PathLock's offering, and we decided to go with PathLock. So I'll start off with an overview of the steps which we took to implement the SSO solution from PathLock. So these are on a high level, these are the steps which we took to implement the product, and this is before the configuration. So we engaged with our primary PeopleSoft support provider, which is version 1, and PathLock was also involved at all stages of the installation, setup, and configuration of the SSO solution. So we had personnel from PathLock available online during all stages of the installation. In terms of installations, we need installs on all application and web servers for the PeopleSoft databases or instances where SSO has to be implemented. So if you have multiple application servers or web servers in your productions database or on other databases, all of those servers need to have the installations for PathLock's SSO. We would need to have the service provider metadata also in each of the instances where SSO is configured. There's also steps for adding and modifying the sign-on people code. I'll go through each of these steps in a bit more detail, but on a high level, these are the steps we need to implement. And then the web profile configuration has to be modified to allow access to authorized sites like microsoftonline.com. Regarding the sign-on people code, it has to be added in the right sequence for the credential validation. And just on the coming back to the service provider metadata, this is for authentication of credentials, and in our case, this is against what is there in Active Directory, which is what we use for our credential authentication. And I've touched upon this a few times. We were keen on ensuring that our PeopleSoft login pages and any other pages which capture the user ID and password could be replaced. So there is a need to either customize or replace the existing pages. In terms of the single sign-on setup in Allen and Overy, we decided to implement a single sign-on in all our instances in production and also in the non-prod instances. The primary reason for having SSO in non-prod as well is because in our setup, we have copies of production data in all our different instances. This includes in dev and UAT. What we found is this helps us in our testing and also to replicate instances, issues we see in production. So if we need to replicate these issues in any other instance and apply the fix and test again, that is convenient for us. So we have gone ahead with that approach. And so there was a reason for us to have SSO in all our instances. Now, the authentication or the single sign-on validation is against a single instance of Azure AD in production. So both the production and the non-production instances have got integrations to, or at least it can validate against the setup in Azure AD in production instance. So on a high level, that's the SSO setup. Now moving on to the configuration of SSO, and this configuration is a more general configuration, not just the SSO, but for the other PathLock products as well. This page, once you have PathLock installed and on an instance, you then have access to the PathLock's product configuration pages. And the PathLock product is configured using what we call policy sets and policies. This page gives you a flavor of what is possible on the configuration. So you have we have the 4 different functional areas. One is a single sign-on. You have the activity logging, and if you have a look at the data masking functionality, the configuration on a high level, you can see it. We specify what fields need to be masked, which page or component that field or set of fields are going to be in, and then how that field is accessed. You also have the option of specifying which role or user should be excluded from the data masking, as in there could be some users. In our case, it's diversity fields which are being masked, but there could be members from our diversity team who needs to view that field value in an unmasked state. So that there is that option as well. So there's plenty of configuration options, and this gives you an idea of what's possible. And finally, the policy on privileged access. So this is an example of a configuration page once the PathLock product is set up in an instance. Moving on to the SSO setup, we set up the SSO details for each instance. In our case, we started off with our development instance, where we added the service provider metadata using this in the SSO configuration page. We then generated the XML for that instance and passed on the details to our Active Directory team, where it is set up in Active Directory. And then once the SSO was set up in our dev instance, PathLock has a feature where we can export the configuration for our dev instance and import it into another instance, where you can tweak the configuration there so that it works for that instance. So it's again easily configurable, easy to set up. The SSO setup was fairly straightforward. Moving on to the next area of the SSO configuration, this is the sign-on people code changes, additions and changes. So here we have added two events. One is for the SAML authentication for credential validation against Active Directory. And then there is another people code for the privileged user access. So we need to ensure that these are added to the, if you're familiar with the PeopleTool security, under security objects, there's a sign-on people code where you need to ensure that the events you have added or modified is in the right sequence in this particular component. And finally, we customize the pages where the user ID and password were being captured. And if you're familiar with the setup of these pages, these are on the web server where you have the pages like the signin.html, signInTrace.html, and expiry pages, which you need to customize or replace to make sure that those pages, even if you have been signed out, it takes you straight back into the application rather than you having to provide to on single sign-on today. So at this stage, if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to take them now, or I'll move on to the next modules if there aren't any questions. You will have time at the end for Q&A. Okay, I assume there are no questions, so we'll go to the next module, which is the privileged access functionality. So like I mentioned earlier, we use the privileged access feature from PathLock mainly for our admin and support users, and which this feature gives them the ability to switch to other users and take on their profile. This is useful in two different areas for us. So the ability to switch to a batch user mode, and the batch users are used for configuring integrations and for scheduling process in our PeopleSoft system. So there is a need to switch to the batch user. Then the other area is for our support team members who need to switch to users who might have issues, like our HR users or our self-service users if they raise an incident, and the support users need to actually see that issue within the system. They can switch to that user's profile and actually view the incident and support the system. I'm gonna say that we implemented the privileged access at the same time as single sign-on because we didn't want any reduction of functionality in terms of the support help desk activities, and they were able to continue to support the system in the same manner which they were able to do prior to SSO implementation. So on the privileged access, once we have the module installed, those users who have got the privileged access, under navigation bar, they'll have a icon for privileged access. And using that privileged access, you can then switch to a user. On screen, you can see two different instances of switching to another user. One is the batch user, which I mentioned, and the other one is an HR user or a self-service user. So we have quite a large user base, and there are a number of users with quite similar user IDs, and in some instances, names as well. Not necessarily mine, but there are a number of people with similar names. So what we found useful is to add either the business title or which office the user is in, and also the team which the user is in. So that helps the support users to quickly switch to the user who is having the problem and who they need to proxy in as. With regards to the configuration for privileged access, this again is quite straightforward. This functionality is enabled for users who have got roles with a specific permission list. Now, this page is used for administering the privileged access configuration. But because we manage privileged access for all the users in our system, so this is almost 7,000 self-service users and HR users, and our systems team is around 15 to 20 of us who would need this privileged access. So you can see at the bottom of this page is where the privileged users are set up, and for each self-service user or HR users to whom our HR systems team members need to switch their access to is we need to set up the privileged user. So what we have come up with is managing this using dynamic roles. And there is a process, custom process, which is scheduled to run daily. This populates the HR systems admin team and support team with access to all the self-service users or HR users in the system. So this is a process which runs daily, and if someone moves or joins the HR systems team, they're automatically added to this privileged access. So that's one area we make sure the privileged access is kept up to date. And the other thing, area where we make use of this feature is occasionally for testing some functionality in our UAT environment or test environments. So you can temporarily give access to teams who are doing testing. For example, we might have a payroll team releasing a functionality on a new payslip, for example. If they want to test, see how it looks for a specific self-service user, we can temporarily give them access for a few days by specifying the from date and to date, and this would be in the UAT environment. They could do that testing. We'll specify to which users they would need access to or to switch to, and then they could test that feature or that payslip to make sure everything is working. So we have the option of temporarily giving access for test purposes or any other purposes. So that's everything I wanted to cover on the privileged access. The next feature I want to touch on today is on data masking. And this is the ability to hide or mask data on for fields on pages where there are other fields as well. So you might have, for example, compensation data. There might be certain teams, like say like the payroll or compensation and benefits team members who would need access to the actual value of the or the amount to be paid on a certain compensation type. But there could be other teams who need just access to the pay frequency of which pay components is it. So the amounts field could be masked and visible just for the compensation team members, whereas the other anyone else who is accessing the compensation page on job data might not see that information. It would be masked for them. Another case could be that of in our case, we have used it to mask a gender-specific field on our personal data page, where that is hidden to everyone but members of our diversity team. So this page is open for a lot of administrators because there are fields which they need to maintain data for, but this specific field is available only for or viewable only for our diversity and inclusivity team members. So that's another case where we would use the data masking feature. The configuration for data masking also fairly straightforward. You can configure this at various different levels. This page, you can specify the conditions where you, for the masking, you can club together a number of fields if they have got the same rules, or you can have just one rule for one field, which is what we have done for the example which I showed on this page. You could also we have got other pages where there are a set of diversity fields which are masked as well. The same field could be available on multiple pages, and you might have one set of rules for one particular page. So, in PeopleSoft, you can, if all the fields are in one page, you could manage that using permissionless setup. But if it's mixed with other fields as well, then that is where data masking is especially useful. So here you specify which component and the personal and page that field is. And you also set the rules for excluding users of a certain role. So in our case, we have excluded our diversity team members. They are assigned this AOX diversity permit role, and they would then be excluded from the data masking. They would be able to view the data on that field. And in the actions grid, we specify what kind of masking we do. In our case, we have used a style class of the text being displayed in red and a specific text there. You also have the option, if you want, you could replace that sensitive data hidden field with a list of hash values if you want it. So that's where you set the actions for the data masking. So that's was on data masking. And the last component that I wanted to cover from Pathlog was the logging of activities. So this is, you will log the access to the PeopleSoft application. And this would be in addition to what you get from Oracle, where PeopleSoft has got its auditing feature, and there are auditing at both the field and record level. But this captures the additions, changes, and deletions to field values or records. The activity logging from Pathlog gives you the option to log all the access to PeopleSoft, any page or component which a user goes into, or which any field which is access that can be logged. So that's what this feature provides. This is a configuration page for activity logging. In the last field over here, you can see a number of parameters, and this is what defines what's logged. In our case, we have decided to log the time when a particular page or component was accessed, which user is accessing it, from which device, what's the IP address of the machine accessing the page. We also have the details of the record being accessed, which mode they are accessing it. So you can specify a lot of parameters, and there's, depending on what parameters are specified here, all that is then recorded in a CSV file, and all this is logged or is saved on the web server. So this gives you an idea of how the data looks in the log file. So you have the date field, you have the user ID, the IP address, the component and the page, and also the key fields of the record. I haven't displayed all the values here, but this gives you an idea of what is possible with activity logging. And what would be useful is also, Pathlog has a product which can be used for displaying this information in a meaningful way on dashboards. So that can be used for interrogating the data. Where we use the log files is essentially to get an idea of usage of any new functionality which we release. Let's say we develop a dashboard, and then we make the first dashboard available to our users, and we just want to gauge the interest or the interest from our HR community in that, using the dashboard. If we see there is sufficient interest, then we can develop more dashboards and roll it out to our users. So this gives us a sense of what interest there is in a particular functionality or component. That's where we primarily use this. And then this also helps us in responding to audit queries from our auditors. So that's also another area where we use this. Even though there is information available on the usage of app servers and web servers from your servers directly, this log file can be used to see if all application servers or web servers are being used as well. That information is also captured here. So on a high level, that's all the modules I wanted to cover in addition to single sign-on. And before we move on to Q&A, just to wrap up, the enhanced security which we have implemented by using all the Pathlog products, this leaves us in a good place before our move to the cloud, which is we are planning for later in the year. We were looking at implementing these security features before our move to the cloud, but because of the incident I mentioned before, we had to prepone our plans, and we implemented all this at the end of last year. So at this point in time, we are in a good space as far as our move to the cloud is concerned. In terms of where we are with our PeopleSoft application, we think it continues to offer good value for our HR users and our stakeholders. We regularly review other products in the market, and our feeling is our PeopleSoft system stands up well against all the other products out there. So the plan is for us to continue to be on PeopleSoft for the foreseeable future. So that's everything I wanted to cover today. I'll now hand over to Stephanie to coordinate any questions you might have.
Thank you, Varghese, for your presentation. Again, if you do have any questions, please add them now into the questions box. Okay, so we do have a few questions. The first question that we have is the activity logging functionality delivered, or is it something offered by Pathlog?
So the activity logging is also a module offered from Pathlog. So in terms of what you log is depending on the parameters you set in the configuration page, which I displayed earlier. Sorry, Stephanie, was that the question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's entirely a module from Pathlog suite of products which we have implemented.
The next question is also, have you seen any performance latency after activating activity logging?
There has been no adverse impact on performance. I must say that that's not been an issue. What you might want to take into account is there will be a lot more entries in your application's server logs. So if you are used to interrogating your application server logs, you will see a lot more entries there in terms of connections happening. And this could be due to the privileged access management, privileged access entries, as well as the way the Pathlog products does the connections. So that's something which we have observed. But in answer to your question, there's been no adverse performance effects as such.
Okay, great. The next question is, how has data masking at DB levels differed from your solution? Is your masking the same as redaction?
Okay, that's a good question. So what we need to bear in mind is data masking, which is offered from Pathlog, is at the application level. It's not at the database level. So this is purely when a user logs into the application. This is just a view of the field or the set of fields on a page, and that is what is masked. So at the underlying database level, the values are recorded in clear text or however your system is configured to record the data. That's something you need to bear in mind. The actual data which goes into or recorded in the database is not necessarily encrypted just because you have enabled data masking.
Okay, great. The next question is, what cloud service are you migrating to?
So we are, like I must have mentioned at the beginning, so we use Microsoft technologies predominantly. So we are moving to Microsoft Azure for our cloud. Most of our applications are in Microsoft Azure, and that's where we are migrating to.
Okay, and then our next question is, will there be I'll answer this one. Will there be an opportunity to download the presentation after the meeting? Yes, we will be sending this presentation, the recording of this presentation, to everyone that registered for the session. So you'll get that in your email by tomorrow. And then what steps have you done at Azure AD side of SSO? Do we need to register for PeopleSoft application in Microsoft Azure? How do you configure LDAP in Azure? Does that make
Sorry, Stephanie, what was the last part? Have you configured that?
How do you configure LDAP in Azure?
Okay, yeah. I don't have the full details of the LDAP configuration, I must say, but in terms of exchanging the data with our Active Directory team, it's fairly straightforward. So the configuration within PeopleSoft, once you have installed as your Pathlog SSO, we have a URL which needs to be configured within the Pathlog's configuration, and then generate the XML, which needs to be passed on to in our case, it was the Active Directory team who then set up the configuration on the Active Directory side. I'm not familiar with the setup on that side, but it was fairly straightforward, is my understanding. So I've worked on SSO on other applications as well, or at least worked on similar areas for setting up SSO on other applications, and some of them have proved more time consuming than this particular instance, which was fairly straightforward for setting it up for PeopleSoft. So I think the configuration is fairly simple.
Okay, perfect. We just have a few more questions.
Sure.
The next one is your data masking functional only for PeopleSoft pages, or does it also mask the same data when it is returned in a PS query?
I'm just trying to think whether we have used it for anything else. No, we haven't. No, it doesn't mask the data when it returns out the PS query output. No, it doesn't. So on the reporting side, the reason why I'm hesitating is we don't report on this diversity data. We haven't set up PS queries for reporting on diversity data. Now we do, most of our reporting is done using our reporting warehouse, where we pass this information on, and even their security is restricted or limited to people who need access to that data to run the reports. But in answer to your question, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't mask the data on PS query, but that's a good question.
Okay, and then our last question is, where can I get more information on your application level data masking product? And I can somewhat answer this one. We can have someone reach out to this person to give some more information on our application level data masking product. But do you have anything to comment on that, Varghese?
No, I think it's the data masking feature itself, which I went through. Let me see if I can bring up that page. I just wanted to mention that that's heavily configurable. If you can still see my screen, you can see the level of configuration detail on this particular. Am I still sharing my screen, Stephanie?
Yes.
Okay, so you can see here, and this partly explains the previous question on if it's mask the data on PS query as well. So you can see you specify the components and the pages here, and which fields or set of fields. So there is the policies and policy sets where you define the data masking rules. So I don't think there's anything on we can do on the PeopleSoft query side. No, nothing more to add. Just to say that it's as you can see, it's configurable. So it's yeah, it's got all the details. Configuration is pretty straightforward.
Okay, great. And if you do have any more questions, feel free to reach out to us at info@pathlock.com. And as I said, we'll also reach out, we'll have our representatives reach out to you if you have any of questions on any future products or how more information that you would like on these products. Okay, so just to wrap up, we have just a few announcements. We have another webinar coming up on July 18th that's co-presented with Cooper Cole analysts, and this will be effective application access controls in the modern business IT landscape. This is a really exciting presentation. So if you would like to register for that, I'm going to put a link in the chat right now. You can also go to pathlock.com and you'll see at the top of our page that there's a link to register for that. We also have more sessions coming up throughout today, tomorrow, and Wednesday. So if you would like to register for more webinars during the Pathlock Innovation Series, I also put the link in the chat to go ahead and look at those sessions and register for any that you would like to attend. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you so much for attending, and we hope to see you at future sessions.